will address economic strategy, the economics of strategy. We'll be looking at the power of principles, giving a more historical perspective. The lesson analyzes the business environment in three different time periods between 1840 to 1910 all the way to present. That's about 1840. It looks like this is a time when the business infrastructure, market conditions, the size and the scope of the firm's activities, and firm's response to changes. This historical perspective illustrates that all successful business have used similar principles to adapt to widely varying business conditions in order to succeed. So in the period of 1840, we had informally organized or operated localized markets. The size of the business was more restricted by the lack of production technology, professional managers, capital, and large-scale distribution networks. So you find the business practices evolving with the changing business environment or needs. The business owners ran their businesses and depended more on brokers, agents to match the product with the needs of the buyers. We had forces in place, however, that would enable businesses to expand their economic activity over larger geographical areas. So during this period, doing business, there were a lot of intermediaries, farmers to factors like brokers and agents. That's what we are trying to say. There was infrequent transactions. There was a lot of scarcity in information regarding sales, prices, and competing goods and services. So there's limited transportation, for example, and communication infrastructure that made it more risky to do business, to expand your business, or even restricted the businesses to only compete within small local markets. So the infrastructure, like the transportation, the communication, and were very poor and poorly developed in between 1840s. And therefore, because of this nature of infrastructure, there were more family-oriented businesses were dominant in the market, and the market was more local than international. So we had rail at their infancy stages. So there were countries were talking about developing the railroads. Waterways were still long distance, so there was no way to transport over the sea. The routes were so limited. With poor transportation, then producers were only limited or to focus on the local markets. So most businesses were more family-oriented businesses. We're talking about post office, which was dominant mode to mode of long-distance communication. We had the use of the telegraph, for example, which was extremely expensive and not everybody could afford. So most factories, like I said, were more sole proprietorship during this period of 1840. But the story is changing as we go towards the 19th, the 1840 towards the end. We had technology was still limited, production was very low, production was more local, there was no transportation, there was no infrastructure to access larger markets, and so all these affected how we do businesses. So without communication infrastructure, information on prices, different sellers and buyers were not readily available. So another problem was like access of credit. So you may want to access credit facility, but this was not available. So it was only available based on personal relationship. Like, how do we relate with you for me to give you a small loan to start your business or to boost your business? So all these factors were affecting. So in general, when we look at the next period, that's between 1910 and 1910, and the later years. Then we had production in technologies. So the infrastructure for conducting businesses had tremendously started improving. So we had mass production in technologies, which led to high volume of manufactured goods and services. The railroads begin dominance because we had countries like the United States, countries like Germany, who had already developed their own railway networks, and that was really to better the transportation services. So newer technologies were adopted. This permitted higher volume of standardized production. We're looking at the expansion of the rail system, permitted a reliable distribution of goods and services to a wider geographical regions. So with the introduction of the rails, it means we were able to reliably or comfortably distribute the manufactured goods and services to different geographical locations. And what about the telegraph and the telephone services? The moment these services were readily available, then businesses were able to monitor, to control their suppliers, to talk to their distributors, to contact their factories, and that really enhanced how we do businesses. So finally, I'll talk about the growth of financial institutions. This made the businesses to raise their capital, to transact more in a global scale, and also to expand the size of the market reach by making the investments to capture the benefits of these innovations. So we're talking about multi-visional firms emerging. This increased the size and complexity of the operations. Industries becomes more concentrated, and we have a more standardized or increased labor-related conflict that are beginning to mushroom. So we have securities of market shares and firms. We have credit bureaus starting to come up to control the credit facility. We also have innovations which will help in monitoring and reporting business activities, and we also have public disclosures. So the government regulations were also being put in place. We have corporate laws, antitrust laws, safety work, safety related laws, increased regulations, and all these really improved the quality of life for the businesses and their household. So we also have the mandatory schooling. So the government encouraged people to send their children to school. This has a long-term impact on the labor market. So with the people going to school, they learned newer skills, and these skills made them more readily available to address the issues that may be showing up in their future careers. So we had expanded infrastructure in the 1910s all the way to current, and we have newer technologies. That means higher volume of production. That means growth in the financial infrastructure. This made the financial companies more visible, and because they wanted to be extremely visible, they partnered with the small companies, and in that the small companies benefited and started to grow. So we have large vertical integration of firms which are on the decline. We have companies coming together in form of joint ventures and alliances, mergers and acquisitions, and this has opened up more opportunities for diversification, and then we're looking at more complex organizational structures. So the infrastructure today has really improved. Now we have the air, the rail, and the ground transportation becoming more better coordinated than it was before. We have more sophisticated communication and data processing technologies that could enable, like, for example, container shipping and transportation, trucking, and so on. So we have cities like Georgia that have grown relying on air transport in spite poor railway and water connections. So Atlanta City has grown immensely because of such opportunities posed by poor rail and network. So people are saying that, hey, we don't have rail and network, but we have the best airports like we have in Georgia. So we have communication technologies today have increased. We have more complex, instantaneous transmission of complex information. So businesses which have invested in these new technologies need sufficient flow of throughput to keep their production level high. That is even the largest and the best managed firms have constrained the problem of control, and again sufficient information are made on a timely basis through the adaptation of this change. So with the adaptation of the new technologies, then information is readily available. We've enhanced the worker productivity. We can easily control how efficient information can be, and so on. As a result, our farms are vertically integrating into raw materials acquisition, they're integrating into distribution and retailing, therefore eliminating the need to rely on independent factors, suppliers, and agents. So there's a lot that is happening today, and therefore I will not end my discussion today without talking about regulation of the banking, capital markets coming up, globalization of financial markets, and also liquidation crisis of the 2008 when we had that financial crunch in the whole world. So the production today has also gone a little bit up. We have the utilization of new technologies that is reorganizing how farm use these technologies and how farm participate in their production in a more faster way, using available resources effectively and efficiently at a low cost, ensuring that they maximize on their profits. So the government today has also increased in the areas of financial management, in areas of safety discrimination. We have laws that have been put in place to protect the environment, to protect the workplace, operational safety, and workplace safety, and so on. So we also have in areas like airlines, trucking, financial services, we have regulations that have been put in place, and this depends on the sector. Some regulations have been relaxed to make sure that the sector can easily grow. So we have government is working together with other governments through treaties, through agreements, trade agreements to ensure fair trade between governments to governments, between cities to cities, and states to states. And so we have policies that are being put in place to govern, like, for example, the free trade zones, to govern the development capabilities, and so on. So we have government policies that are backed by a strong research. So commercialization of research and development within the government departments is very critical, because we're saying that the government is informed by this research in order to implement the different changes that we want to see in our government. So, as a wind up, I want to talk about these changes that have been created in the emerging market. Their businesses are becoming more reluctant to invest in countries where there is issues like corruption, cronyism, where leaders reward their friends, their cronies, and so on. So where there is conflict, states governments would not want to invest in such countries. So therefore, these changes have created more opportunities, and therefore they've made modern marketplace more global and increased the number of competitors at the same time. Technological innovations have given farms more control and decreased their geographical distances, but they've also allowed smaller farms to compete with the larger counterparts based because of the technology, which is a more leveling player. So technology is put at the same level, whether you're a small company or a big company, then you can effectively compete. The well-developed financial market have lowered the cost of capital, but the same markets have large firms that target potential hostile takeovers. So they are taking over from the small startups. They're taking over small business which are still struggling financially. They're being taken over, and so this is also another challenge. So the businesses use tactics, and these tactics may vary from farm to farm, but they make sure that these tactics that they're using meet the different business needs and circumstances. So therefore, the economic principles and the behavior relationships is used from the tactics, and they are more general in nature. So these principles are the relationships that haven't changed so far. They are applied to a variety of business circumstances. And therefore, by judiciously applying these principles, managers can successfully adapt their firm's business strategy to their competitive environment. So in summary, or what you can take home today, we've talked about horizontal integration. I mentioned about horizontal integration, and just to define that, it is a growth in size and enhancement of the functional responsibility of a business unit. I also talked about infrastructure several times. So infrastructure refers to assets that assist in the production or distribution of goods and services at individual firm, and these services that a firm cannot be in a position to provide, such as transportation infrastructures, the roads, bridges, telecommunication infrastructures, financial infrastructure, and so on. I also talked about path dependence. Now, path dependence is an actor's position. So, towards the history, this is an actor's position on its starting conditions, the initial conditions of an organization. We also have throughput. Throughput are movements of input and output through a production process. So we are saying that in a production process, there is input, there is output. So the movement of input and output through a production process is what we call throughput. Finally, I talked about vertical integration, and I said it's an act by which firms decide to choose to produce raw materials or distribute finished goods and services by themselves, rather than relying on independent suppliers. So, in a nutshell, that is what today's topic would discuss. Next topic, will be going deeper into this business and strategy, and then we'll continue from there. Thank you so much.